Hello everybody and welcome back to a brand new Doctor Who video where today I'm going in-depth discussing, reviewing the regeneration episode, The Power of the Doctor. So firstly I want to say a big thank you guys this week for the response to the reaction video I posted yesterday, which was absolutely mental. I'm pretty sure that it was my most successful first day video I've ever done. It got over 10,000 views overnight, which is just bonkers. So thank you. It's pretty crazy that I've been away for 6 months, I come back and post that and you guys still want to watch it. It's just brilliant. So thank you so much guys for that. I really, really appreciate it. Of course, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button for loads more content like that, loads more reactions we've had in the past you can check out, and there will be more to come in the future as well, so there'll certainly be that to enjoy. But of course, today I want to properly discuss and dig deep into the power of the Doctor. It's going to be really fun just to analyse it, break it down, kind of almost for myself to work out what I feel about it, because I'm still not yet 100% sure exactly how I feel about it, I think. So, The Power of the Doctor. Of course, it's an episode we've waited many, many months for. It's over a year since they filmed it. It's been over 6 months since the last episode of Doctor Who Legend of the Sea Devils, which didn't exactly get us excited and ready and hyped for what was to come with this episode. But you know what? Ultimately, I was pleasantly surprised by The Power of the Doctor. Clearly, it has its flaws. We're going to get into that. But fundamentally, it was an enjoyable episode of Doctor Who. I sat there, I watched it, and at the end, I was happy. I enjoyed it. It had enough going on in it. It had enough interest in it to keep me, engaged. And as much as there's been many flaws of the Chibnall era, which are also present in this episode, as a whole, I really think this episode, I don't want to say necessarily works, because there are, problems, but it is just enjoyable. It's fundamentally an enjoyable episode with great shocks, surprises, returning doctors, companions, David Tennant turning up at the end, all of that. It combined, even if the plot isn't always brilliant, but the kind of just everything together kind of made it a watchable and enjoyable celebratory story, really, I think. So we may as well start from the beginning of the episode and kind of work our way through as much as possible. So of course you have this really, really long 7-minute opening sequence before the titles even. We even see the titles with Dr. Dan and Yaz trying to save this space train that's being taken over by Cybermen, or the Cyber Masters, should I say. Now, this scene, clearly sets out this episode is going to be, action-packed, 100 miles an hour, action after action, which is, full in this scene with, shooting between the crew and the Cyber Masters, and just general carnage going on, really, I think. And, it's a very exciting opening sequence. I think it feels a little bit inconsequential at the start, and you're not quite sure how it's going to tie in. And it does, I guess, ultimately it does tie in that the Cyber Masters want to take the child who isn't actually a child and is actually the Quorunks or whatever it's called. So that kind of, does nicely tie into the rest of the episode. It's not complete kind of, a waste of time. But it is still quite an exciting segment. It obviously leads to the departure of Dan, which, I'll come on to in a second. But I felt like one of the sort of slightly weird bits of misdirection in this scene was, why did they make us think that this child was the Timeless Child? They clearly were going for it because the child does look quite similar to what we, have seen the Timeless Child be back in Series 12. And, they also played a little bit of the Timeless Child sort of theme underneath that first shot when they open up the car, the sort of container, and show her. So they're clearly trying to make the audience think this is the Timeless Child, which was, I know, and as you saw from my reaction the other day, that's what I thought at the time. And it's just a bit of an odd one that it absolutely is nothing to do with that whatsoever, but they're kind of trying to misdirect us into it. So yeah, I thought that was interesting, that was notable, and I don't quite understand why they did that. I guess just to try and, throw the audience off the scent of what it's really about, but then the actual reveal isn't really anything big. So yeah, as much as, that scene's fine, it's pretty solid, full of action, excitement, that bit of misdirection was slightly odd, and I didn't quite get why they took that approach. So then we pretty quickly get into the departure of Dan, of course, from this episode. They decided after just, 9 or 10 minutes into this hour-and-a-half special that actually it was time to offload Dan, to move him on so we can focus on the rest of the story. And it does feel like a very rushed exit. Clearly having a companion leave 9 minutes into your special is always going to feel rushed, no matter what you do with it. I kind of understand it. It does make sense. He's had his adventures. He's really got close to the edge there with being shot. His space helmet being damaged out in space and could have nearly died and all of that. So I totally understand why he left, but it's just a sort of surprisingly quick and low key exit that sort of feels a little bit. It's fine and it's okay, and I think it just kind of comes back to the whole, they've never really known what to do with Dan. Right from the start, he's kind of been this sort of additional companion we never quite needed. and it feels like they've never really fully known what to do to him. They do with him. They sort of early on he had some good stuff, like in War of the Centaurans with his family and stuff, and he really kind of led a lot of scenes in that. But kind of since then, through these specials and things, he's just not really been necessary to be a part of the story. And clearly you can see through the rest of Power of the Doctor that he wouldn't have fitted into it at all. And so I think it made sense to write him out at such an early point in the story, even if it was slightly surprising. Now, from this point, we kind of fairly quickly establish the various different threats and settings. You've got Russia in 1916. You've got the sort of cyber conversion planet. You've got the Daleks in the volcano. You've got the unit base. So we kind of quickly go through and establish all these different locations, and no one really knows quite what's going on, quite what the link is. And I think, well, we should say at this point that the whole fundamental plot, the storyline, is a bit bonkers, doesn't make a lot of sense. You can kind of tie it all together if you really think about it, but it does feel like, Chris Chibnall's attitude to the Master is very different to what Stephen Moffat, and to an extent Russell T Davies was as well, because for Stephen Moffat, he really developed the character of Missy through the era, and really did that whole issue turning good and everything. There was a lot of depth to that. Whereas I feel like Chris Chibnall's taken inspiration from the 1980s edition of The Master and Anthony Ainley, who had the most nonsensical plans in every single story he had, that was kind of destroy the Doctor or take over the Earth or something that was completely bonkers nonsense, didn't really make any sense, always failed at the end. And I feel like to an extent Chibnall's kind of taken that approach with his sort of take on the Master as well. Although I do think there's a little bit more depth and reason to what he's trying to achieve in this story than maybe was initially sort of thought on the surface. Because, it appears he wants to destroy the Earth, but also take over the Doctor and ruin her reputation. Now, you might, it's a bit generic. It might seem a bit pointless. Why the heck does he want to become the Doctor? But actually, I think it makes some sense off the back of the Timeless Children, where we last saw the Master, of course. That was the episode where the Master discovered that the Doctor is truly, the most special Time Lord ever, and that she's the one thing he could never bear, that she's actually really, really important and special, and that a part of her is in him, and all of that, and the fallout of that, which was pretty significant at the time. And so in many ways, I think it makes logical sense that the next step after going through that whole experience is, okay, well, I want to be the Doctor then, because she's the special one, so why don't I just go and take her over and become the Doctor? That seems quite a sort of logical progression for the Master, I think. And so, as much as it's not spelt out in the slightest on screen, I sort of feel like you can kind of extrapolate that from what we saw in The Timeless Children to kind of give the Master a motivation for doing this. I mean, his general motivation is just, I want to kill the Doctor, I want to take over Earth, blah, blah, blah. And, that's what we get in most of his stories, particularly, the way Chibnall has approached the Master as well. But I feel like there is actually a little bit of carry through from The Timeless Children. There's a bit of sense behind why he's doing it. But, getting the Cybermen and the Daleks and all that involved does seem a little bit over the top. Like, I don't fully understand why he has the cyber conversion planet in 1916 and wants to, convert Cybermen, I suppose. Or he's using that planet to kind of, shoot the laser beam down that's then going to force the regeneration of him into the Doctor, and then he's also going to go and convert all these people into Cybermen. But then also in 2022 he's trying to use the Daleks to set off a load of volcanoes that's going to kind of destroy the Earth or something. I think that's kind of the gist I've got of it, and I just don't really understand why he's doing all these things. He's obviously being Rasputin in 1916 for some reason. Let's be real, Chris probably just wrote it for the moment where they play Boney M. And that was a great iconic moment. I loved it. But also, what's the point? I suppose the only other thing is for the whole giving Tegan a Russian doll. That kind of ties in with, him being Rasputin and Russia and all that. I mean, I have problems with that bit as well. Like, how... So, let's just get this straight. The Master has sent Tegan a little doll of a Cyberman, which is actually a Russian doll containing loads of other Cybermen. And he somehow knew that Tegan was going to get in contact with Ace or somebody like that, end up inside Unit, and then at the perfect moment have the doll so that it can be opened and release a load of Cybermen into Unit. He had the foresight to know that was all going to happen. Like, that's a lot of plot convenience right there. Like, why wouldn't Tegan have just got a message from the Doctor and then just left it? Or, tried to contact the Doctor in a different way? How the heck did he know she was going to go to Unit and then it would all happen that way? Like, it's the kind of thing with a lot of the Chibnall era, and this episode is another problem with that, is if you really think about it too much, then yes, there's a load of convenience in there. doesn't make a lot of sense, and you kind of just have to roll with it because you break it down and it kind of falls apart. So yeah, that's a clear problem, but I guess we've got to put it to one side and just kind of let that be. Now, as I briefly touched on there, we of course saw the return of Tegan and Ace. They were the main returning companions, I suppose, in this episode, which was really, really great to see them again. I didn't feel like they were absolutely spectacular in this episode. They were good. They had solid performances. It was so great to just see them interacting with the 13th Doctor, and to play off all of that. Yeah, it didn't feel like there was anything groundbreaking in there for them as companions, but it was really nice to see them. And in particular, the little scenes they had with both the 5th and the 7th Doctor, I feel like were probably some of the highlights of the episode, really bringing some sort of narrative conclusion to their characters as well, that was sort of lingering from the past and through the being away for so many years. I felt those were some of the most heartwarming, heartfelt scenes of this whole episode. It was just so wonderful to see those moments. Even if outside of that, they didn't have anything amazing to offer, but it was still really, really great to see them, and I did enjoy their characters in this episode. I think it's pretty clear to say with this episode that this sort of story, the whole structure of the episode, hasn't come from a brilliant Chris Chibnall idea, and he's gone, wow, that's a great concept, I want to roll with that. He's basically just got a shopping list, a checklist of things he wants to get into this episode. He literally said it in an interview beforehand, saying, I've always wanted to do a story that's got the Master, the Daleks, and the Cybermen all in it together. So obviously he's got that little shopping list written down of, I want Master, I want the Daleks, I want the Cybermen. It's Jodie's last episode. I want classic Doctors, I want classic companions. How the heck do I make this a story? And that is an approach to take, particularly, I suppose, with a sort of pseudo-anniversary special. Like, in some ways, I kind of anticipate that this episode is going to feel more like the 60th anniversary special than the 60th next year is actually going to be. I mean, obviously, we don't know that much about it, and maybe I'll be completely wrong. But I feel like this is the most anniversary celebratory episode we've really ever had. Even more so than Day of the Doctor, I think, just in the amount of returns and, fan service and continuity references. I mean, the Dalek Master Plan one was just the best. Loved it. But yeah, I feel like that rather than having a great idea, Chris has brought in just a load of stuff he wants to do. And so that's why it doesn't always tie together perfectly or make absolute sense, because he's literally just going, I want to do these things all at the same time. Okay, let's try and tie these in together. You get slightly pointless plot threads like the whole the paintings thing and the seismologist being shrunk thing, which is basically just to get the Doctor's attention. I think is that they only pointed those aspects to it, because the paintings are just, I guess, to make people notice, I suppose, the right people. But then why the heck does Ace notice, of all people? And then why does she contact Tegan? And then why do they end up at Unit? Again, plot convenience. You kind of got to roll with it. That's Doctor Who, let's be realistic. But, if you think about it too much, you are like, why did all these things happen in this order? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. This episode was full of great moments, great scenes, great excitement. Like seeing the Doctor regenerate into the Master is just one of those bonkers, crazy ideas that I never thought I'd see in Doctor Who. And yeah, it's a bit nutty, but I absolutely love it. I think it's just brilliant. It's such a clever idea to do with the show. And to, kind of, when we know that the Doctor's regenerating at the end of it, to kind of throw that spanner in the works of, oh wait, we're only halfway through this episode and she's just regenerated into the Master. What the heck is going to happen next? Like, I just thought that was all so fascinating and created such an interesting dynamic with Yaz as well, and having to deal with all of that. Obviously seeing the Master then go and put on a sort of classic Doctor's mixture costume thing was also brilliant. And yeah, threw me off the scent of what was about to come with the classic Doctors returning. In many ways, I'm surprised an idea like this has never been done before in Doctor Who, but having a sort of, I don't know, not a heaven, but like a sort of mental last point before you regenerate for the Doctor to kind of go into in their mind is a really clever idea. And just that opportunity to then have cameos from, 5 classic Doctors is just brilliant. And I loved it. It was one of the absolute highlights of the episode. Just seeing Colin, seeing Peter Davison, seeing Sylvester, Paul McGann back again on screen, actual dialogue, in a real, in a televised Doctor Who episode. I don't know about Night of the Doctor, and Time Crash and whatever, but to see them truly back was just such a special moment, I think. And just, I couldn't stop smiling watching it, really. It just was so fun, so exciting, so brilliant to see them back again. And, it may well be that though that is the last time we see them on screen, as much as it's been ages since we last saw them. I also feel like it's unlikely that's going to happen in the 60th, and now that they've done this. And that's probably going to be it for them. And so to be able to see them all one last time, I think was just really, really special. And created such an exciting moment in this story. Now, we might as well move on and work towards the end of this story now. I would like to talk about the Doctor and Yaz as well. I think that was significant. It was interesting and slightly surprising to see, it having been very little addressed, their sort of relationship. I guess they kind of looked at it as the end of Legends of the Sea Devils kind of reached a sort of end point of, we can't travel together forever, so that's just how it is. Accept it kind of vibes that we got at the end of that story. But to see very little real, I don't know what to describe it as, but that relationship being developed at all in this story, only really that emotional goodbye at the end, sitting on top of the TARDIS, which was just perfect. I think that was, as much as I originally thought the only way Yaz was going to leave was by dying, I couldn't see a way that she was just going to leave the Doctor. But actually creating that moment and that point where, Yaz isn't going to love the next Doctor, whoever that may be. And as much as she is in love with this Doctor, it's actually better to say goodbye while she's still the Doctor rather than, see that change through and then dislike her and whatever, and that would all go wrong. And so I think that made so much sense, really, that exit. I think it worked really, really effectively in the end, much more so than I thought it might to sort of begin with. And yet, as I say, that scene at the end when they're saying goodbye, sat on top of the TARDIS in front of Earth, it's just perfect. It's perfectly filmed. It's so perfectly played. I think it really just completes their story, their friendship, their relationship. All of that, I think that was so perfectly encapsulated there. And really that played into a lot of Jodie's sort of final scenes, really. It wasn't what we were used to from her regeneration in many ways. It was so much more hopeful and uplifting. It didn't feel like a great moment of sadness. It wasn't a Doctor who, was in tears over the fact they're leaving with a companion who's in tears over the fact they're leaving, like we've had in, say, Time of the Doctor or The End of Time, even Parting the Ways to an extent. Yeah, it just felt so much more sort of positive and hopeful. And I mean, obviously the whole Companions Anonymous thing at the end, a little companion club, was probably I think seeing Ian Chesterton again was probably my highlight of this episode. I know it's a really small thing, but it was just, after 57 years, to see him back in Doctor Who again. He gets a line of dialogue. I mean, seeing Mel as well and Joe was brilliant at the same time. Seeing Graham again was nice as well. And, all those little cameos were so brilliant. But just seeing Ian in that moment was I just loved it. It felt such an exciting, special moment for the show, because he's definitely not going to appear again in the show. And so to have that one final moment, I thought was really, really special. And just to sort of play that, sort of have that scene play out just as the Doctor's approaching her moment of regeneration, I thought was just such a great way to do it and a great way to frame it, to have all these people who have such fond memories of the Doctor all meeting up together to basically talk about how amazing she/he, was and is, and to be able to just have that sort of moment to kind of see that kind of reaching the ultimate conclusion from the first episode of the Jodie era, where she's like, I've got no family, it's just me now, to ultimately reaching that point of that extended family that she's kind of created through this era, I think is just a great completion of that sort of storyline, I think, and reaching that moment where she's ready. As much as it's hard, she is ready to change into the next person. And seeing her walk out there, I think was just brilliant. Now, before I talk about the regeneration scene itself, I just wanted to kind of cover off the sort of story of this as a whole, because in many ways I was quite surprised by the story we actually got in this episode. Given how, particularly the Series 12, Series 13, were so heavily focused and devoted to the Timeless Child storyline, to the Division storyline, the Fugitive Doctor, all of that sort of story, those threads were weaved through Series 12 and then very heavily into Doctor Who Flux as well. In many ways, I thought it was remarkable that it wasn't even a slight mention. I know, obviously, the Fugitive Doctor turned up, but the Timeless Child Division, any of that wasn't referenced once in this story, and the whole hour and a half final story of this Doctor wasn't mentioned at all. And so, yes, there are clearly going to be many an open plot thread that's never going to be wrapped up from this era now, because Chris decided to, in many ways, make this episode very standalone. Yes, I know it's full of continuity references of returning characters, but actually the story is really quite standalone from anything else we've had in this era so far, which did surprise me. I think in some ways it probably was for the better for this actual episode. I think it made a better story for this final episode than if we'd ended up going down heavily into more explainers of the Timeless Child or Division or whatever. So I think for this pure individual story, it actually worked better and probably made the story more enjoyable and more accessible for an audience and all of those things. But also, I think for the era as a whole, it kind of is a slightly more negative thing, because we just don't have that resolution that we maybe wanted in places. The Fob Watch has just been left behind, left in the TARDIS for probably nobody to ever pick up on again. The fact that the Doctor is the Timeless Child, that's just been left. The Fugitive Doctor, we're never going to know any more about her, probably. We never know why she has a police box TARDIS. Like, all those things have just been left open. What really is going on with Division? Are they fully gone now? all of it, it's kind of just been left and that's it. And I think that is a shame, because as much as many people haven't loved that storyline, that has been a fundamental part of the Jodie Whittaker era of Doctor Who, the Chris Chibnall era of Doctor Who. And for that to not even be slightly addressed in the final episode, I just found it really surprising and a bit of a shame, even if it wasn't kind of dawning on me during watching it for the first time, because it was a really, exciting, action-packed story that was in there and was, good fun. But by the end of it, you're actually thinking, oh, wait, there's a lot of things here that we just haven't tackled. And really, these last 3 specials haven't tackled it at all. Kind of, we didn't know it at the time, but the end of Doctor Who Flux, that moment where the Doctor drops the fob watch into the TARDIS and kind of leaves it, that is actually the end of really the arc of the Chris Chibnall era. That whole storyline ends there and doesn't get referenced again, I think, at all, pretty much in these last 3 specials. And yeah, I think that's a shame. I can understand why it's happened and why Chris did that, but I think ultimately it is a bit of a shame to not see any more conclusion to that whole storyline. I have to say, one thing I felt was a little bit underwhelming in this story was the way that the Doctor actually died, because we'd gone through this whole massive change of the Doctor turning into the Master, which, thought, okay, that's probably what's going to ultimately kill her. Even if they turn back, she won't be able to survive. She'll have to regenerate again because it's all messed up with forced regenerations and stuff. That's where I thought it was going to go, and it would be a sad goodbye of her realising, oh, wait, I'm back, I'm the Doctor again, I've survived. And then, oh, wait, actually, no, this is the end. Or to an extent, like David Tennant, I suppose, that in the end of time, but spread over a slightly longer period. That's where I thought it was going to go. But then actually, we had, the Master regenerate back into the Doctor, back into Jodie Whittaker. Oh, wait, she's fine. She's the Doctor again. She's changed back into her costume. It's all brilliant. She saved the day, defeated everything. We have our Journey's End moment with all the companions controlling the TARDIS. She does all this clever stuff and then has this he's about to walk back to the TARDIS and has this final face-off with the Master, which isn't really a face-off. It's kind of just a goodbye, you lost, ha ha ha, I'll see you later. And then, the Master just shoots that energy beam towards the Doctor and that's it. She's killed. That's it. She's dead. It just felt really kind of like there was no build-up to it. We all knew it had to happen. We knew this was the last episode, so we knew that this was going to be the moment where she died. There had to be a reason for it to happen. But I just didn't really feel like that moment was particularly earned. It was, it wasn't a heroic death. I'm not saying it has to be for the Doctor, but it was just a sort of almost silly accidental death. If she just walked back to the TARDIS, she would have been fine. But actually the Master did it. And I can get Chris Chibnall's idea. He wanted the Master to be the one to kill the Doctor. I think, that's fine. That's a cool idea. I know we've kind of done it before, but it's still cool. But just the way it happened felt really quite underwhelming for me and was a bit, and then it just sort of felt, as good as those final scenes were with the companion club and saying goodbye to Yaz and all of that, it also kind of felt quite rushed through to that end point from there when we had such a long episode. I kind of felt like the critical moment, the critical death for the Doctor would actually happen quite a bit earlier in the story, and then she'd kind of be holding on to try and save the day and, defeat everybody. Because, up until that point, and she's defeating everybody and, saving the day, she's fine. She's just normal. There's nothing wrong with her. It's only in that final moments that she gets killed. And so, I just felt like that was a little bit naff, a little bit, not earned, and a bit sort of just silly and accidental rather than anything big and dramatic for it. So, I don't know, I thought that moment was a bit of a shame, and it takes away a little bit from the story, but maybe not, critically so. Of course, it also leaves the question of where the Master's going to go from here. We see him basically lying there dead as Sacha Dhawan in this episode. I mean, obviously the Master's going to turn up again. It's inevitable. We know Doctor Who now. We know it well enough, even in the new series as well as the classic series, that the Master is going to turn up again. I think that Sacha Dhawan was quite possibly the highlight of this whole story. I think his Master is just brilliant. He's one of the best characters of the Jodie Whittaker era. I think the sort of Chris Chibnall has absolutely nailed the writing and the casting for Sacha and the Master, and I think Sacha's just pulled off such a great performance throughout this era as the Master, but particularly in this episode, being able to play all these different sort of takes on the Master, being kind of the Doctor Master at points as well, just all of that, I think he performed, so brilliantly and really stole the show in many ways in Jodie's last episode. He was one of the absolute highlights. So I think it will be, as much as I'm sure they'll bring a new Master in, I'd be absolutely amazed if Sacha was brought back with Russell in the future. I still think it's a real shame that we're going to say goodbye to him, because I think he's been such a great Master, and I think there's so much more potential that could be explored there by a future writer as well. But ultimately, I think it's not going to happen. And so we come to the final regeneration scene, the first time in New Who that the Doctor has regenerated outside of the TARDIS. I know it's been rumoured for ages that was what's going to happen. Stood up on a cliff, seeing one last sunset. I mean, visually, that final scene was just stunning. Absolutely perfect. The way it was shot, the effects, just the whole of it was absolutely brilliant, and I loved it. I thought it was so perfect. And it's only a very, very brief moment for the Doctor there, their final sort of, the final lines. But again, it continues that trend of really positive and hopeful, being sad that she's not going to get to see what happens next, but then it's kind of like, tag, you're it, in a really hopeful, positive way, of very just accepting of, okay, that's it. It's time for me to say goodbye. Goodbye. Good luck to the next one. Which I think really fits with the Chibnall era ethos of Doctor Who in many ways, of being, more light, I guess, in some ways, more uplifting, more hopeful, rather than sort of particularly the Moffat era that later on, got very dark and gritty and serious. And I think Chibnall really changed that with this era, for better or for worse. I'm not saying that his era is great, but I do think that the sort of, the final end of this Doctor does very much fit in with his vision, his ethos, easy for me to say, for the show. And so to see the Doctor go out like that with those sort of final lines, I think really, really worked very, very effectively. And so, of course, we pull away. As you saw from my reaction, I thought that might be it. They might fade to black. And clearly the original episode, that was what happened. Before Russell had come in, done his thing and whatever, the original, when they wrote it at least, was pull out to a wide shot of the cliff and the Doctor regenerating and fade to black, because there was no Doctor to go in at that point, which is pretty crazy to think about, that when they originally shot it, they just didn't know what was going to happen next. That was it. Jodie was stood there regenerating, and then that's a wrap on the episode, guys. And so it's crazy to think about that, but of course we pull back in, and there is David Tennant once again. Yeah, we kind of knew, highly expected this was what was going to happen. I wouldn't say I was surprised when it actually did happen. I think I'd kind of come to accept that this was probably what we were going to get, and it wasn't going to be Shooty straight away. Yeah, my gut for a while had been that it was going to be Tennant. I think that's what I said. I'm pretty sure that's what I said in the last video that I did last week about it. And so that's what we got. We also got the very intriguing change of costume as well. And we see the Doctor seemingly note that as he's sort of, doing his classic what moment. It was obvious that was what Russell was going to do. It just made sense to do that. As much as it's a little bit cringe, but for the fans, for the nostalgia, for all of it, it made perfect sense to approach it and use those sort of lines. Do the new teeth thing, I think, was great, or the same teeth rather, which I thought was, a great fun moment. But I know people have said, yes, the first Doctor, when he regenerated into the second Doctor, he's changed his clothes, so it's not unprecedented for the Doctor to change clothes and all of that. But I do think the fact that it happens in the way it did, that the Doctor makes a note of the fact his costume has changed as well, his outfit has changed, I do think it's going to be something to do with the toy maker. We obviously, spoiler alert, it's pretty likely that Neil Patrick Harris is playing the Celestial toy maker in the 60th, and I think that he is going to play into the whole shenanigans as to why we've got David Tennant back again, why the costume has changed. This isn't just a normal regeneration. Clearly something's happened, something different has gone on here to make this play out the way it has. I've got no idea exactly how that all happens, and we're going to have to wait until next year to find all that out, but I do think that's how it's all going to play out for next year. And in many ways, I'm surprisingly okay with the fact that it's David Tennant, and that David Tennant is being officially called the 14th Doctor. I'm still kind of feel like Russell is lying, and that actually they're going to call Shooty the 14th Doctor in the future, because the press releases have been very, very like, David Tennant is the 14th Doctor, Shooty Gatwa is the 15th Doctor, and kind of spelling that out to the audience. And a part of me feels like that's all a lie, and that actually, this Doctor won't be the 14th Doctor in the future. They're just trying to misdirect us into thinking that. And actually he's a sort of anomaly of a Doctor, I suppose, because clearly it's not meant to happen this way, and something has gone, been changed in the process of regeneration to bring about David Tennant's return. So I don't know, we're going to have to wait and see, but ultimately I feel a lot better about it than I did, 10 months ago when I first did a video saying how this is never going to happen, it's absolutely not going to be true. I am happy to accept I was wrong, and I'm happy to accept that my kind of opinion has changed a little bit, and I feel a bit more okay about it now. I have faith in Russell T Davies to do this, to do it right, to do it well. I do think he's going to get it right in the 60th. And I think it was just a really exciting moment for fans at the end of this episode. It really, I think, will draw in a bigger audience. It got people talking all around, on social media all around the world. The general audience who haven't watched Doctor Who since, the late Matt Smith era or something, are talking about Doctor Who again because David Tennant is back. And I think that is great, great news for the future. So, The Power of the Doctor. Is it an all-time classic? No, it's probably not. Is it a really fun and enjoyable episode of Doctor Who? I think ultimately it is. It's probably about the best we could have hoped for from a Chibnall era finale, given all the problems it's had throughout the era, all the things that have not been great. I feel like it's a very Chibnall episode, but actually there is so much good stuff in there. As a big Doctor Who fan of the classic and the new series, of course, all the fan service is lovely. I love it. It's great. It makes me happy. And yes, it's a bit of, eye candy, I suppose, in many ways, which kind of glosses over some of the problems of this story, probably. but I still feel like I can kind of accept that and say it's a fun and overall enjoyable story. I feel like it is an appropriate way to end the Jodie and Chris era. And yeah, it feels like certainly the best episode of this year and one of the best episodes Chris has done, I think. As I say, it's not an all-time classic, but it is pretty good, I would say. So guys, sorry for this long old video talking about this for ages. Do let me know down in the comments below what you thought of the power of the Doctor. Do you think it was an appropriate end to this era? Do you think it was terrible? Do you think it was the greatest episode ever? I want to hear your thoughts and also your theories for what we're going to have with David Tennant next year and how is that all going to play out. I want to hear what you guys have got to say about it. But that is just about it from this video, guys. Hit that like button, that subscribe button if you're new here, and I will see you again very soon for a brand new video. But until then, it's goodbye.